It is a sad story. Sudan used to be looked at the land of opportunities, the land of mighty people.
The Arab don't respect us. The Arab don't give us our right. The Arab don't give us our dignity. They don't see us as people.
I feel very sad. I think we have arrived to a very dangerous point where we should, or we have to divide our country.
Most of the people are working for separation, that they have to separate from the north. Enough is enough.
A new national anthem for a country yet to be born. The lyrics and music were created here at Juba University in southern Sudan and tell the story of the ancient kingdom of Kush, of struggle, martyrdom, and of hope for the future. As Dean of Music and Arts at the university, Professor Muhammad Ali oversaw the creation of the new anthem. He's a northern-born Arab who has embraced the multiculturalism of the tribal South.
هم بيقولوا نحن عرب لكن الحياة هنا في tolerance في تسامح في integration with the community. بعدين الناس هنا ناس كلهم طيبين وطيبين باعتبار it is a nature by the way. دي طبيعتهم هم كده الناس. يعني حتى ما في any sort of discrimination I cannot feel it. فكل قبيلة هنا عندها ثقافاتها، عندها تقاليدها، عندها عاداتها. يعني هنا بتجد في المجتمع هنا في مسيحيين، في مسلمين، في ناس لا دينيين كمان. العالم ده كله هو وطني، هو وطني لأنه بيهمني فيه الإنسان في المقام الأول، ولا بد بيننا كأناس كبشر نتجاذب أو نتناول كل هذه الأنواع الثقافية الموجودة سواء كان في أفريقيا في البلاد العربية.
But his is a rare viewpoint in what has become an increasingly polarized country, where over 2.5 million people have died in civil conflict. The future will be determined by a referendum in which Sudan will almost certainly break in two, with the south gaining independence from the previously dominant north. The fate of the most volatile region, Abyei, as yet unknown. Khartoum, a modern, vibrant capital city for a country which, despite US-imposed sanctions, has in recent years enjoyed one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. But surrounding the city, a ring of shanty towns referred to locally as the Black Belt. This is Mandela, recognized as the most deprived slum in Khartoum. It's populated almost exclusively by southern Sudanese, many of them refugees of war. They're just a few of the millions left displaced in a country that has rarely known peace.
كده عرب كلاد وقف دايرنا نمشي بلدنا ما مجبورين لو دايرنا نقعدين نقعد شمالين ما قعدنا كويس ما عندنا بيت كويس ما عندنا مويه وانا ناس دايرنا نمشي بلدنا.
In Southern Sudan, there is a freedom. Even though you don't have a good job, you have your own land, which is inhabited, and it is not temporary. But we now live in Khartoum temporary.
ما عندنا أكل وما عندنا أي حاجة شغل كم مشينا ما نلقى شغل عشان نجي نأكل وشوفها.
Across town, in the rundown suburb of Mayo, the removal truck has arrived at the house Moses Taban and his wife Deborah share with their extended family. Having arrived in the north at an early age, Moses claims he was discriminated against almost from the beginning.
مجرد ما ودوني في مدرسة قالوا لأبوي ولدك ده بيقرأ دين بتاع كفار وبعدين بيقرأ إنجليزي. نحن هنا ما عندنا إنجليزي وما عندنا دين بتاع كفار، ولدك ده لازم يقرأ تربية إسلامية. مشينا للوزارة، الناس الوزارة قالوا لا ترجع المدير بتاعت المدرسة ده بيحل لك أي مشكلة. رجعنا للمدير بتاعت المدرسة برضه رفض. قعدت درست تربية إسلامية وسقطت بس في تربية إسلامية، قال لي تعود شنو؟ ثالثة تاني.
Now that the South is at peace, they both want to go home. For Deborah, there's an additional reason. She wants to escape the insults she says are commonly thrown at the black community, especially the use of the word abd, slave.
وللأطفال إنه أنا مثلا نحن عبيد، أنا بقوم بشعر بعدم راحة، ما بكون مبسوطة. يعني نحن سودانيين وكلنا قاعدين في بلد واحد وتربينا في مكان واحد. من المفترض يكون في تساوي ما بين الناس، ما يقول ده عبيد.
All around the capital, Southerners prepare to return home. And across the country, every means of transport is being used in what has become a mass migration. An exodus of perhaps as many as 1 million people, leaving for what most believe will be a better life in an independent homeland. The first great exodus wasn't voluntary. Black slaves taken north by mainly Egyptian and Turkish traders.
The opening of the Sud gave the slave traders access to southern Sudan, where they were able to cause havoc and devastate villages through trading in human beings.
This is the Sud, one of the world's largest swamps, covering up to 40,000 square kilometers around the border area between northern and southern Sudan. For thousands of years, grasses and rafts of water hyacinths and papyrus had merged to form a shifting labyrinth of channels, a natural barrier to any boat attempting to navigate the Nile. It wasn't until 1839 that an Egyptian-sponsored expedition finally broke through and the slave trade mushroomed.
It opened the South Sudan to slave traders. Traders were after ivory, gold, and human stock.
Sadiq al-Mahdi was the last democratically elected Prime Minister of the Sudan.
The slave trade is a matter of tragic history. And it is something that represents a dark aspect of past humanity. But what we need to apologize for is the association in the North, in our culture, in the North, between blackness and slavery. As Northerners, we should apologize for this association between color and slavery.
In the late 19th century, Sadiq al-Mahdi's great-grandfather had conquered Sudan in the modern world's first Islamic revolution. In the final battle, the British Governor-General, Charles Gordon, was killed. But soon the British returned in force, and in partnership with Egypt, effectively ruled the country until independence in 1956.
People were relieved that at last they're going to have their country for themselves. They will run their own affairs. And they were more or less united in their feelings of togetherness and readiness to build the future of the Sudan.
When the British left, they left a democratic elected government. The first government was elected in 1954. That government who opted for independence. The British left an independent and strong civil service.
They did leave good civil service in the Sudan. Even the Sudan Defense Force was very efficient, but mainly for the north. They did very little in the south.
Out of 800 civil service posts vacated by the British, just 4 were given to Southerners. But even before independence, the signs were clear that the South was uneasy with a Northern-dominated administration.
The trouble between North and South started in August 1955.
Joseph Lagu, who became one of southern Sudan's most famous rebel leaders, remembers the first shot fired in what eventually led to 50 years of conflict. A company of southern soldiers refused orders from their northern officer, who then shot one of them in the arm as a warning to obey.
That initial shot made the soldiers to disperse from there, disorderly. They went into the arms store, broke the arms store, took weapons, and then started shooting their northern commanders that they could get hold of. And after finishing off with them, they went into the town and then started killing any northern Sudanese they can find.
Even today, many Arab shopkeepers living in the south are fearful of what might happen should Southerners vote to break away. Abu Qassam Babakir has watched with growing concern in recent months as friends have abandoned their stores to return north.
كثيرين كمية ما واحد والله اثنين والله ثلاثة فاتوا كثيرين من الشمال اخواني برضو واصدقائي الشماليين كثيرين فاتوا وروحوا 60% والله 70% ديل مشوا خلاص.
He now plans to leave himself, uncertain whether he will ever return.
حيجي طبعا كان في امن وسلام بنجي راجعين لكن كان ما في امن وسلام ما في زول بيجي طبعا.
Others are determined to stay.
أنا جاي شغال هنا في الجنوب والجنوب ده والسودان واحد. السودان ده واحد ما السودان اثنين. أنا في السودان هنا في الجنوب عندي وطأ عندي شبير كان مرتبط فنوني هنا ده ما في حدا.
The seeds of the north-south divide had been sown long before Sudan itself had gained independence.
It is the British to blame because they wanted the South to be a separate country.
In 1922, the British colonial masters had created a time bomb for regional and religious conflict by restricting the movement of northerners south of the 10th parallel and of southerners above the 8th. The result was a country split in two.
And that was a great mistake. They should have allowed the intercourse, the social and cultural intercourse between the North and South to develop naturally. They didn't. They disrupted it. They thought that the South was a cultural vacuum. It should be filled with Christianity.
Under British rule, the Christian faith flourished in southern Sudan.
نقدم لك يا رب الذبيحة التي بها سعالات العالم.
The British were trying to get rid of the Islamic influences in the south. They wanted Southern Sudanese to be converted to Christianity by allowing the missionaries to operate in the South Sudan.
They just didn't want Northerners to spread Islam. Islam was developing fast there. So it is obvious that their motive was to stop Muslims from being there to spread Islam, especially that Muslims at the time were very, very devout Muslims.
That resist the Spirit of God, that resist all the good things that the Lord does in the lives of the nation. Come, Heavenly Father.
Christian missionaries flocked to the south, determined to take advantage. The traditional tribal religions were marginalized. Sudan was now on the front line in the struggle between the world's two biggest religions. Within just 2 years of independence, the new government faced a vote of no confidence in parliament.
The then Prime Minister, Abdallah Khalil, negotiated a handover of power to the military. He invited Ibrahim Aboud, General Ibrahim Aboud, to take over power.
Aboud, 1958, that's just 2 years after independence. It's very rare that a country that has been fighting for independence for years and years and years, and then immediately after independence, is gone away, taken away from them by the military. It's very, very rare. It was, a handover to the military.
So began a cycle of short bursts of democracy, followed by military dictatorships that has lasted to the present day. General Aboud himself was overthrown 6 years after taking power, making way for civilian rule.
We lived through a very special period, what we call today the golden era in Sudan.
Omar El-Fadli rarely ventures over the threshold of a world he has created from a time gone by. A time when Khartoum was a very different city. General Aboud was gone, and by the late 60s and early 70s, the capital city had become a magnet for those seeking a sense of freedom.
Khartoum was the Beirut of Africa, or was the Paris of Africa even. As Beirut used to claim that they used to be the Paris of the Middle East. We believe that Khartoum was also, at that time, in the way of having an open market, as I said, latest products from London, from New York, from Paris. You can find it right in this street. But also culture, entertainment, the freedom of having parties, wedding parties, all through the night if you wish. I mean, everything was just a normal, happy life, to be honest with you.
Despite restrictions, the leading members of the band have continued to play small venues in Khartoum since the 1960s.
Those people have been through so much because of the political changes. So this country has been through so much, anti-culture, anti-music, anti-arts, anti-so on. And then you have the curfews for so many years, and then you have the closure of all the entertainment places, and they're still playing. There is a big gap between our generation and the new generation today. We don't speak the same language. When we talk about democracy and freedom, what is democracy and what's freedom? In fact, they say, hasn't democracy failed in this country? Do we need freedom?
But the freedoms enjoyed by the rich youth of Khartoum in those days were a world away from the realities of poverty and conflict elsewhere in the country. A war had begun years earlier in the south.
We started action exactly on 19th of September, 1963. We started with our bare hands. I myself entered the bush with machete in my hand. I had no gun. I had 3 old guns, which I gave to my company commanders. I organized the guerrilla army and called it Anyanya. Anyanya is name of a poison, which is used by some tribes, including my own, Madi tribe, and it is a deadly poison. If it touches you, or it is given to you in water or in food, there is no medicine for it.
The Anyanya rebellion became a civil war lasting almost 9 years and brought Joseph Lagu into direct confrontation with an old army colleague, Jafar Numeri, who led a military coup in 1969.
I knew him since 1960 here in Juba. As he took power in Khartoum, I found myself also in charge of the movement in the bush. And when the effect of our fighting was biting and so forth, he made a pronouncement, one of his main pronouncement, that South Sudan is a distinct region of the Sudan, and the people living there have their right to self-rule. I said, if someone has recognized what I am fighting for, then what is now left is to seek a way to have meaningful dialogue with him.
A peace accord was signed in 1972 in Addis Ababa. It gave the South autonomy in everything except national matters such as defense and foreign affairs. Joseph Lagu became vice president, and 10 years of relative peace followed, the longest in modern Sudanese history. But unknown to the general public, a quiet revolution which had started in the corridors and debating societies of Khartoum University in the early 60s was beginning to wield influence in political circles. The key figure to emerge was a man who would eventually pull the country onto a path of strict Islamic principles, who would orchestrate military coups, and who is blamed by many in the South for creating laws which led to the Second Civil War, in which over 1 million people died. His name, Hassan al-Turabi.
درمان سوق ضخم جدا كان بغذي السودان كله. كل السودان بيجي يشتري من ام درمان هنا. السوق هنا يعني قديم جدا وكان مقسم لمهن. المهن دي الحدادين، السمكريه، النجارين، السياق، كل المهن يعني.
The Tabibi family has been crafting precious metals in northern Sudan for over 500 years.
ما بس السودان هو في الشمال بس، لكن في كل يعني انت لو طلعت لشرق السودان حتلقى في حضاره وفي تاريخ وفي ناس صنعت حضاره. لو مشيت جنوب السودان برضه بنفس القدر، طبعا ظروف الحرب هي اللي خلت الوضع كما هو عليه الان.
لانه هنا بقى السودان ما إثنية واحدة ولا دين واحد ولا نوع واحد من البشر، مش أمة واحدة. يعني احنا أمم كثيرة في السودان. المسلم مسلم، المسيحي مسيحي، ما في حاجة.
Like the Tabibis, the Sudanese have a reputation for friendliness and tolerance. But the country's constitution, based on a localized interpretation of Sharia law, is less tolerant. It redefines the role of religion and politics, and the chief author of the Sudanese version of what they call political Islam is Hassan al-Turabi. He first came to prominence as a student leader coordinating street protests, which led to the overthrow of the Aboud military government in 1964.
And from the university, we staged a revolution, a popular uprising, and the army later on joined the people. Oh, every general strike, everyone is in the street.
Civilian government lasted just 5 years before being replaced in another military coup, which brought the left-wing Colonel Jafar Numeri to power. Turabi was imprisoned and then sent into exile. Over the years that followed, Numeri swung from initially being aligned to the communists through Arab nationalism to Pan-Africanism, and finally in the late 1970s, sensing a mood change in the country, he began to embrace political Islam.
When he saw that the Islamic fundamentalists were a political factor, he changed into Islamic fundamentalism. He was that sort of man.
Numeri played the populist card by turning strongly towards political Islam.
Oh yes, he did. And he was, of course, very jealous of us. He did not want Islam to be related to us, because we were the only ones who were championing the cause of Islam.
Numeri invited Turabi back to Khartoum and appointed him to the powerful post of Attorney General. They then set about dismantling the Addis Ababa Agreement, which had granted the South autonomy. It was at this point that John Garang, a protege of Joseph Lagu from the Anyanya days, and now a senior officer in the Sudanese Armed Forces, began plotting a southern rebellion. In May 1983, in Garang's hometown of Bor, soldiers mutinied, refusing to obey orders from their northern commanders. Numeri sent troops to crush the revolt. It was the opportunity Garang had been waiting for.
Numeri foolishly ordered the attack of Bor garrison, despite my personal warning that if you light fire, it will spread like bushfire and you will not be able to quench it. Leave those people alone.
In the face of attack from a large force of northern Sudanese, Garang joined the mutineers and led them into the bush to start a guerrilla movement. These are some of the survivors that left Bor to form the Sudan People's Liberation Army, the SPLA. Although the first few months of the SPLA were marked by infighting amongst its leaders, a decision taken in Khartoum would soon unite the warring factions.
Turabi played with the minds of the foolish military rulers. He made them to do for him what he could not do alone.
In September 1983, with Turabi at its core, the Numeri regime introduced a strict interpretation of Sharia law, which included punishments of limb amputation for crimes such as theft, stoning to death of women for adultery, and a ban on alcohol consumption.
Do you accept that the introduction of the September laws struck fear through the South?
I think it was only used as propaganda and struck fear thereafter. But it wasn't actually application, because bars were open all the time in Juba. Those days, I'm quite sure about that. When I went to Juba myself with Joseph Lago. And, but security people sometimes, if they think you are subverting a public order for any reason, they might, they might be as zealous, Islamically oriented, like the Salafis, like the jihadists, all over the world.
When Numeri declared the Islamic Sharia, Turabi said, What would have taken us 100 years to achieve, he did it by stroke of the pen.
Even among northern Muslims, there was anger, particularly at what they saw as Turabi's manipulation of the fundamentals of Islam.
الترابي كان مستشار رئيس الجمهورية فعن استثناء الغير المسلمين من قوانين سبتمبر فالترابي رفض لأنه قال دي بتبقى حجة إنه بعدين يدخلوا بها لمداخل أخرى. حتى هو طبق الحدود فقط، حدود الشريعة الإسلامية، ما طبق الشريعة الإسلامية بفهم.
فما كان المفروض يكون في قوانين بالفهم ده كده، هي اللي لخبطت الموضوع كله.
The September laws would turn what was a small rebellion occurring in the south into a full-scale civil war lasting over 2 decades.
It immediately pitted the country against each other. And it is what made the people of southern Sudan swell the ranks of the SPLM.
The border town of Malakal witnessed some of the worst fighting.
It was terrible. People lie under the beds when you hear the sounds of the heavy artillery. Nobody moves on the road, even in the house, nobody moves around. You just lie down under the beds. People are just frightened. Even when people live there under the bed, you are shaking, one is shivering. Death can come at any time. Yes, some people died. Even near in front of my house also there were some people who were shot. Then they lay there for 2 or 3 days. Nobody to touch them. At that time, then you cannot walk. You just stay in your place. Until the time when the dead bodies are collected, and then you see some police walking on the road, then that will be the time that you can come out.
"300 kilometers northwest of Malakal lie the Nuba Mountains. The people here are a mixture of Christians, Muslims, and traditional African religions. The war affected them all.
رجال ونسوان وحتى مواطنين ديل كلهم الناس ديل ماتوا.
هاي كانوا منذ شهرين حامل وقام جا قتلوه طوالي يلا قمنا مشينا طوالي.
واحد كده رفعني قال لي قوم وانا شحت الناس قتلوا قدامي يعني يوم كان ما تم يعني ما تموت.
Hope of an end to conflict came in 1985. A general strike and mounting public anger led to President January being overthrown while on a visit to the United States.
Washington itself.
Military rule was eventually replaced by a coalition civilian government headed by Sadiq al-Mahdi. But it wouldn't be long before rumors of yet another coup emerged.
I thought that a country with civil war, a country with conflict all over, a country with tension with its neighbors, no one would want to step into this hell.
He had reckoned without the ambition of Brigadier Omar al-Bashir. In September 1989, just as al-Mahdi was about to clinch an historic peace agreement with the SPLA, the military made their move.
The idea was that we'll meet on the 18th of September to clinch this. And one of the reasons for the coup was that they thought this was a conspiracy against Islam.
Unknown to al-Mahdi, it was his own brother-in-law, Hassan al-Turabi, who was behind the coup.
It was our soldiers, actually. And most of the people dressed are not even soldiers at first. But later on, we allowed a few officers to take over.
So you controlled it?
We controlled it.
In the days leading up to the coup, Joseph Lagu received a warning to get out of the country. This former rebel leader was tipped off that the democratically elected government of al-Mahdi was about to be overthrown.
I was tipped by Torabi that there was going to be problem and that I should get away from the Sudan.
Torabi gave you advance notice,
yes,
effectively,
yeah,
of a coup d'etat,
yeah,
and you did nothing about it.
Hmm?
You did nothing about it?
What can I do about it?
Make it public.
Why should I make it public? Why should I make it public? He gave me a hint. He says something is going to happen. Better get away.
As for Torabi's brother-in-law, Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi, there was no warning.
What did your brother-in-law say to you?
Unfortunately, he was on very bad terms with me. He thought I was just taking power from him. And those days I was still on, I was not in office necessarily, but he knew that it's our movement, and I am the leader of that movement.
In the south, John Garang soon faced a rebellion of his own when the SPLA leadership split along tribal lines.
The movement was split into two, and then they launched an all-out war in Bor area, home of Dr. John, of course, possibly trying to strip him of his support.
Garang was from the Dinka tribe, and most of the attackers came from a rival tribe, the Nuer.
They abducted also a number of children and girls and women. There was a massacring of people. Thousands of people died, and it was a total destruction, and the whole area was left deserted, a no man's area. So it was a very terrible situation.
Bishop Samuel Garang and local chief Enoch Deng raced to the town when they heard the news. It took 13 days for the bishop to find his own family.
I found the people down, those dead people, on the road, everywhere. And then I rushed up for my children. Thank God I went and I found them in the bush with their mother, and little food which was with them. There was water and their food. They spent 13 days.
The current vice president of southern Sudan has been accused of orchestrating the Boer attacks to destabilize John Garang, an accusation he denies.
In the midst of confusion, people died.
Actually, it's fair to say that most of the attackers were from the Nuer tribe, your tribe.
Yes.
Were you involved in instigating this in any way at all?
I would have no reason to instigate.
Garang now had to fight a civil war within the SPLA and continue to battle the Northern Army. President Bashir, on the other hand, experienced a golden period as the 20th century came to a close. Oil had been discovered in the border regions, boosting the Sudanese economy. Khartoum began to transform itself into a modern metropolis, and his popularity soared. But as Bashir's star rose, Hassan al-Turabi's influence declined, and soon he became a marginalized figure on the political wings. The discovery of oil has brought its own problems, because 80% of the reserves are in the south, and the pipeline goes north. And in the oil-rich region of Abyei, there's a dangerous territorial dispute that could explode at any moment.
يوم الصيف يجي نجي نخليه خلا هي بنقول في حقنا نحن سيارة ماشيين كي وماشيين كي لكن سكن ما عندنا.
These are the Miseria, a nomadic tribe of Arab origin. For at least 300 years during the dry season, they have left their grazing lands in the north to travel southwards to the place they call the Sea of Arabs. On their way, they must pass through the Abyei region, inhabited by the mainly Christian Dinka Nok tribe. Time and again, the region has been devastated by fighting, which the local population claims is the work of Miseria militias, armed by the government.
I have seen the whole area was burned down. Even those buildings you are seeing, they have just been rebuilt. They were not there. The whole thing has got destroyed at all, and people move towards South Abyei.
But the Miseria chief denies that his people are responsible.
To turn over the picture that the Miseria are bad people, the Miseria are hostile, the Miseria are very violent. Yes, we are not like this. I confirm to you that till this moment, we want to live in coexistence and peace with our brothers Ngok. Till this moment, yes.
After intense negotiations, in 2005, President Omar al-Bashir and SPLM leader John Garang brought 22 years of civil war to an end by signing the historic Comprehensive Peace Agreement at a ceremony in Naivasha in neighboring Kenya. Two key articles of the agreement were for a referendum to be held throughout southern Sudan on independence and a simultaneous referendum in Abyei where the population would be allowed to vote on whether to be in the north or the south. There's little doubt that Dinka Nok favor the south.
This is something that will be decided by the people, because right to self-determination is people's right. So it is the people of Abyei who are going to determine what course of action to take thereafter.
But the Abyei ballot was abandoned amid protests that the rights of the Miseria, who had no vote, were being ignored.
I think Abyei was the mistake committed by the government negotiators in the Naivasha process. The Abyei region belongs to both the Miseria and Dinka. According to the SPLM, it's only the Dinka, which in my view is a racist. These people have depended on their cattle for hundreds of years. You need water, not oil, for your cattle to drink.
The Miseria drinks water, but the government drinks oil. You know? Even if they hide it, we know what they are after.
Failure to find agreement between the Dinka and the Miseria could provide the spark for an all-out war.
If Dinka Ngok say that they will not permit the Miseria to reach the waters, I tell you, we will fight them. We will fight them. We will fight them. And we will go through, even beyond Abyei, to drink water and to take part.
In Omar El-Fadli's restaurant in Khartoum, Darfurian performer Omar Essas sings of peace and unity in his troubled homeland. The United Nations says up to 300,000 people have died in Darfur and 2.7 million have fled their homes. President Bashir, who puts the death toll at far fewer, just 10,000, has had an arrest warrant issued against him by the International Criminal Court on charges of war crimes. It's all a far cry from those heady days in 2005 when he and John Garang had joined together in peace. in the Nuba Mountains near the border between North and South. They still sing of that historic moment. But in a mausoleum in Juba, southern Sudan, lie the remains of John Garang, killed in a helicopter crash just 6 months after signing the peace agreement and 3 weeks after over 1 million people had welcomed him to Khartoum.
Garang came with the idea that the Sudan should remain united. And he believed in that. Till he died, he believed in that. And he looked at the Sudan as a country, you know, that has a role to play. It is a linchpin of the whole continent.
Even his enemies knew that here was a man who had attempted to cross the divide that was Sudan.
He was a true leader. He inspired people around him. He was a towering figure. And I could see that even from my position on the other camp, because he was always an enemy. But no one could miss his leadership character and his abilities.
It was a great loss. Not for the SPLM, not for the South, but for the Sudan and for Africa.
Sudan was the giant of Africa, a great experiment to discover whether different religions and cultures could coexist together. Instead, it has become the land of broken dreams.